so much for joining us today for our panel discussion. We are so excited to have with us Susan Jarboe, Kathy Cronin, and Cathy Richman. What a great panel. And I'm Reverend Linda. Before I let Cathy Richman share her topic with us, as always, let's open by getting centered in prayer. I invite you to sit back, get comfortable, take a breath, close your eyes if you like, and turn within. God, we rejoice in this opportunity to grow together, to learn and share with one another. We are so grateful for this opportunity to grow and glow in divine spirit. Thank you, God. Amen. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Cathy. What's our topic?
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning to my fellow, I guess you're just my fellow friends and partners here as we do these tapings, and to our listening audience. And I decided today that there was something that I just really, really wanted to share, and it's about divine intervention. I don't have a book. It's a real true story, but it is absolutely such an example of beautiful divine intervention. But I did want to start with a little reading about this. And it says, one of the most famous stories of divine intervention occurs in the Old Testament when Yahweh parts the Red Sea to allow his chosen people, Moses and the Israelites, to escape the pursuing army of the Pharaoh. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. And that comes from Exodus 14, chapters 21 and 22. And I thought that's such a beautiful example of divine intervention. And I know we all have stories of divine intervention, but this one is just one that I think is really special. And I wanted to share it with you. Years ago, I was a child advocate called a CASA, and I would take whatever cases that they would call me and say, we have a child that needs a CASA. These were children that were in the foster care system. And they called and they said, we have a little boy, Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is living at the Children's Polinsky Center because his mother is in hospice and his mother is dying. And so they said, but you'll need to come and pick him up at least twice a week so he can visit his mom at the hospital. I said, sign me up, I've got time. So I would go and pick little Jeremiah up, cutest little guy, and sit in the back seat of my car, and he would sing. And he had a couple songs, and he would just sing, and we'd drive up to hospice, and I would call the nurses ahead of time. Oh, I know, he would sing My Heart Will Go On from the Titanic. That was his song. And I'd call the nurses ahead of time and said, I'm bringing Jeremiah up. And the nurse would say, well, she hasn't awoken at all morning, so we're not sure if she'll be awake, but go ahead and come. And he'd walk in the room. He'd say, Mommy, Mommy. And she would wake up. He'd jump in her lap. She'd embrace him. She was able to sit up. And and he would just talk to her, and we would have these beautiful visits. And we would do this. I started going like every 2 days. I would take him to see her. And it was his birthday coming up. So I asked her, I said, what would you like to give him? I'll buy it and give it from you. So she said, well, I'd really like him to have a watch. So I got a watch, and I had it engraved on the back, Mommy loves you forever, and whatever the date was. And so the nurses heard that we were going to have a little birthday celebration. So they brought in balloons and, played some happy birthday music, and we had cake. And it was really a special celebration under the circumstances. So I went home that afternoon, my girlfriend called and she said, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "Oh, I just had this amazing experience with this little boy and took him, and I said, Mom's getting close to the end. And so he's going to probably go up for adoption or he's going to be in foster." My girlfriend says, "Oh, well, one of the title reps that I work with in real estate just told me this week that they weren't able to have a child and that they're going to be looking into adoption. I wonder if they'd be interested in adopting him." I said, "Well, he just turned 6 years old. They probably want a baby." And I said, "Well, you know what, whatever, put it out to the universe," right? 20 minutes later, I get a call from this woman, Karen. Karen says, "I heard about this little boy. We're interested. What do we do?" So I said, "Here's the social worker's number. Call the social worker." Well, it just so happened the next day I was taking him to a little birthday party that they were having at the Polinsky Center. And Karen said, "Could we come and just observe?" I said, "Yeah." So they came and they just looked at him and watched him and they fell in love with him. And they came to me afterwards and said, "What do we do? How do we get him?" So social worker, she was able to do an emergency placement. Next thing you know, I'm driving him over to this lovely family, Karen and her husband, who wanted to be parents so bad, and they were absolutely in love with him. So as Mom lingered on, finally, Karen was able to go to the hospice, and she would tell the mom, Jeremiah, he's going to be living with us, and we're going to take good care of him, and just reassured her. Well, then she passed. And so we went to the funeral that they had at hospice, and the only one that was there was Jeremiah and the new foster mom and the social worker and me. And from there, he went on and he stayed with them. And the next thing I heard was that they were in the process of adopting him. So here he was. He never had to go through the foster care system and all that. He went into this wonderful, wonderful home. And to me, this was divine intervention. How did my friend call me on that day, happened to have talked to a realtor that week, So it was divine intervention, but it gets better. So I went on from there and I started my Angels agency. And I would take in the intake calls in the beginning, and social workers would call and say, "I've got this." So a social worker called one day and she said, "I've got this adorable little redheaded little girl. She's 10 months old. Do you have a home?" And I said, "I don't. My homes are all full." But I said, "But let me call you back." So I don't know why, but I thought of Karen. She'd never said anything at all about wanting another child. But I called her and I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm at Walmart." I said, "Can you find a chair to sit down?" I said, "How would you like a sister for your son?" She's, "Are you kidding me?" And I said, "No, this little girl," told her about what I knew. I said, "Here's the social worker's number." And sure enough, they met up. They brought the little girl over the next day and they adopted her. And so I recently, Karen called me and we had lunch together and she brought me up to date and on how the kids are doing. And Jeremiah is he's graduated from college. He's got a job. He's got a girlfriend. I mean, the kids couldn't be doing better. And I just share this story because it was like I couldn't have planned it any better. I couldn't have planned that the worker would call and I didn't have an opening. What made me think of her? I don't know. I hadn't talked to her in probably a year, but it was divine intervention. It was God putting it all together. So that's the story that I want to tell. So does anybody have any comments or any little divine intervention stories that they'd like to share?
I love that story. And yes, so many things come to mind, and a lot of them are really long and really personal, but I will share a divine intervention story from my own life that has never been fully explained. I'm in recovery, and as many people who are in recovery have to admit to, I spent some time in jail. It was years and years ago, 30 years ago. So there's been some growth and change. But I was in jail charged with 79 felony charges. They reduced it to 78. And I had been told I was looking at spending the rest of my life in jail. So on Memorial Day, which is the day when they didn't have any professional legal visits, I got pulled from my yard, from my Las Colinas, where I was holding, waiting to go to court to see a lawyer. And the guards, the little deputies, were so surprised because lawyers don't work on Memorial Day. It's the only professional visit they'd ever heard of. But they did their job. They took me down and they sat me down, and I spoke to a lovely woman who reviewed my case and told me that she knew the judge and she knew exactly what I needed to say and how I needed to handle it. And she did the prep work, told me what we were going to do, what we were going to say. She left, and I was told she was not my lawyer. So a lawyer who was not my lawyer on a day when lawyers weren't working came and told me exactly what to do and say when I got to this judge. Of course, it was all county funded lawyers. So when the time came, I had a different lawyer, and he told me that we had no room to negotiate. At the time, and again, this was a long time ago, the 3 strikes rule was brand new. And if you had 3 felony convictions, regardless of what they were for, you were going to do a life sentence without possibility of parole. So this lawyer told me the only thing we can negotiate on, the only bartering we can do, is deciding what state you want to spend the rest of your life in a penitentiary in. So we go to court, and the judge asks me, is there anything you would like to say? Because I'm pleading innocent to all this. And I got up and I told the judge exactly what the woman told me to say. I told him, I am not a bad person. I have a bad problem. I am a drug addict and I need help. And the judge said, but you've never you've never been arrested for drugs. But I was an IV drug user and I had my arm shackled, and he could see the track marks in my arm. So he told me if I went into recovery at 1 year, he would change my one conviction to a misdemeanor from a felony, and I would be done. And that's how I came out of my disease with 1 misdemeanor conviction and no felonies. And that's my personal story, unexplained, of divine intervention. And I know we've all got stories, so let's hear them, ladies.
What I think of with divine intervention are some other terms, you might say. Serendipity, order. I think of order. And in a recent program at Unity, Pastor Robert was asking us, when do we know that God is working in our lives? And Gail said serendipity, and when events are serendipitous. I said, it's when I can see the hand of God in things. And so I think we're all talking about the same kind of thing, divine intervention. My stories are humorous. I have small, humorous stories about, well, I'll tell you the most recent one. It has to do with an ironing board. I want wanted an ironing board. I had one of those little tabletop things you put on top of a table, and it it was good for sleeves, but not much else. And so I thought, well, I'll get an ironing board. And I looked on Amazon and just got some ideas about what they were like, what the prices were, and so on and so forth. And sure enough, what happens is some people are moving out. They have a whole bunch of stuff in front of their coach, and there is an ironing board. Things like this keep happening to me, just little things. When I first moved here, I needed a hat. Well, I won one, as a door prize. And there was a time when I needed my money to be in $5 bills. Well, I kept getting cash back in $5 bills. I see uh, I see all these little things. And I think that's one of the things that unity does and a contemplative life does, is that it makes you more sensitive to little things. You see God more and more often. So although I don't have any big stories, I have a lot of little ones that are fun.
Well, I was going to say, these are some wonderful stories, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that one where that, two children found a permanent home and a loving family to be a part of, and what an instrument you were. And sometimes divine intervention, we are the instruments to make these things happen. And it's sort of, you can see the things. And then Linda's story, how, that out of nowhere someone appears. And I can think of so many times that guidance and intervention has stepped in where I needed. And I mean, how often we think about that parking spot, we're going to create that parking spot that's nearby. And, this was a situation just yesterday. We were going to a picnic over at Mission Bay, but we weren't quite sure where the group was meeting. And that's a pretty long stretch along there where you could park and have to walk a long ways. And so we couldn't find a parking spot, and we kept going, and we finally found a parking spot. And when we got out, we were thinking, okay, we got a long walk to where the group is. Well, the group was right there at that parking lot, right outside of that parking space that opened up for us when we got there. And I said, it was sort of like, okay, that's a small little thing, but it's so, like Susan said, it's those small little things that show up in our lives that is intervention. And we recognize those. And I'm sure, in my life, I just know that God has brought in the big things that I've needed, answers to. And so often when there's something that I need assistance with, that I feel like I can't do this, it's like into God's hands, I turn it over and say, God, you're the one that I have to trust to have the answers for this, and to make the outcome be, to the right for everyone. And I just, I'm so grateful for the times that I can recognize when divine spirit stepped in and guided me to go a different direction, and then found out that there was a severe accident, or, just the thought that crossed my mind about doing something and getting something done. And then, the outcome that came from that I would never have thought about doing. So it's sort of little things that open up the doors to bigger things in our lives. And, it's just hearing those voices. And sometimes it's a song on the radio that speaks to you. The words in that just speaks to you. And I have to sort of say is that I know, the biggest one that I've shared often is that the guidance that we got when my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the intervention in that led me to go into Google and look up, information about his disease. And we found in Seattle, at the University of Washington, an organization that specialized in that type of rare cancer he had. And basically at that time, this was in October of 2017, and the doctor was sort of saying maybe 6 months, because it had spread through his whole body, that he didn't give him much more than 6 months. And by finding this group and reaching out to them, they said, we want to see him. Come up here. We want to see him. And they implemented getting him on the immunotherapy. And today he's cancer free and, has beat the odds. And every time people see him, he's a walking miracle. But it was that intervention that said, reach out to these people. They've got the answer, and not just totally trusting, like, okay, this is the medical professional he's going to, who didn't even really know the rareness of this type of cancer he had never treated anybody with that type of cancer, but he was just doing his due diligence of what he was aware of. And us finding the experts in that field has given my husband 6 additional years, and he's, healthy and enjoying life. So there's so often that I can say that the hand of God has reached in and pulled me up and said, here, this is what you need to do. And so it's listening to that hand, that invoice. So thank you for bringing this topic, Kathy. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, thank you all for sharing, and I love hearing all of your remarks. And I hope that our listening audience was able to gain something from this. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. If there is anybody out there in the listening audience that has any comments, or if you think you'd like to join us, you've got a topic, something that's you're just dying to share with us, we would love to have you join our panel. We don't tell you what to talk about. You get to come with your own topic. So just know that. And with that, I say blessings to my fellow friends, blessings to everybody listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us, and let's stay connected and grow in spirit. We are on Facebook. Search for Unity Church of El Cajon and follow us and like our posts. You can reach us on YouTube at Unity Church of El Cajon. Please subscribe to our channel, watch our videos, and leave comments which can help us improve. We are on the web at unityofelcajon.org. Email or call our church office to receive our weekly newsletters, which lists all of our activities and opportunities to learn and grow together.